My name, as Mika said, is Judith Houston, and I'm part of the BPIF HR team. I am joined today by my HR colleagues as well as members of the health and safety team. So at this point, I'll ask each of them to introduce themselves briefly.
Morning, everyone. My name's Josh Thomas, and I'm the Health, Safety and Environmental Consultant for the Southern Region here at the BPIF.
Good morning, everybody. My name's Phil Ashcroft. I'm the Health and Safety and Environmental Advisor for the North East, North West, including Northern Ireland.
Hello, everyone. I'm Mila Sukup, and I do Health and Safety for the Midland region.
Good morning, I am Ian Dalton. I'm the HR business partner and I work on the help desk.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Yolandi Gibbs. I'm one of the HR business partners for the East and Southern region.
And I'm Jo Haig. I'm the HR business partner for the Northern region.
And I'm Mandy Robson, and I head up professional services for the health and safety, HR and environmental.
Thanks all. Thanks, guys. So today, yes, as Mika mentioned, our Join the Conversation topic is surrounding drugs, alcohol, and the challenges that these issues can present. There was a recent CIPD study that identified a number of facts surrounding drugs and alcohol. So just over a third of employers have disciplined someone in the last 2 years for alcohol misuse and a quarter for drug misuse. Around a fifth have actually dismissed somebody over the last 2 years. Not all companies have a specific drugs or alcohol policy in place, and very few carry out training with their line managers. Line managers are not given proper coaching on how to deal with disclosures and how to signpost to support, so they're not well equipped. Despite all of that, the survey also reported that most employers, over 80%, said that company social events typically involve alcohol, and it generally has a positive effect. This seems to be a bit contradictory. However, as a quarter of HR professionals indicate that some people actually avoid company social events because of the expectation that they should consume alcohol. I'll hand over to my colleague Mila now for an introduction from a health and safety perspective.
Thanks for that, Jude. So in this session, we'll explore the significant health, safety and economic risks of alcohol and drug misuse within the workplace. It will highlight the impact on both individual well-being and organisational performance. Here are some key statistics to highlight the scale of the issue. Alcohol and drug abuse costs the UK economy around 21 billion and 15 billion annually. Alcohol misuse alone leads to 7.3 billion loss in productivity each year, and 70% of substance abusers are employed full-time, with 17 million working days lost annually due to alcohol misuse. Substance abuse directly affects the workplace safety and performance, with 15% of workers admitting to be drunk at work occasionally. 40% of industrial accidents are linked to substance abuse, and 60% of poor job performance is tied to alcohol or drug misuse. Impaired workers are more likely to have and make critical errors and cause accidents. Substance abuse leads to poor job performance, impacting team and business outcomes. The financial and safety risks are substantial for both employers and employees. Addressing substance misuse through proactive health and safety strategies can reduce accidents, improve productivity, support employees struggling with addiction, all while ensuring compliance with legal obligations and fostering a safer, healthier workplace environment. So I'll pass back to Jude, who I think has some questions to get started with.
Thanks, Mila. Yes, we've had quite a few really good questions sent in, covering different aspects surrounding the topic. So the first question, what are the responsibilities in relation to drugs and alcohol legislation that a company has? Perhaps someone from the health and safety team could answer that one.
Yeah, sure, I can answer this, Jude. That's a really good question, actually. So employers have a legal duty under the Health and Safety Work Act to ensure, so far as reasonably practicable, the health and safety welfare of their employees. Additional to that, employees must also take reasonable care of themselves and anyone who could be affected by their work. Employers must also consider the Misuse of Drugs Act 1971, and if they have a fleet of vehicles where they use drivers, they must also consider the Road Traffic Act 1988.
Okay, so thanks for that, Josh. Another question is, so what specific health and safety risks are there that have been identified in relation to substance use in the workplace?
Yeah, I'll take this, Yolanda. Thanks for that. Yeah, so excessive alcohol consumption can have harmful consequences to health and well-being, in not just the short term but long term, from quality of sleep to personal relationships, including a whole range of alcohol and drug-related diseases and mental health issues. Obviously, alcohol impairs coordination, judgment, increasing the likelihood of accidents and injuries. This not only endangers the individual but also poses huge risks to colleagues and the public. As Mila mentioned before, it's been estimated that 40% of accidents at work are caused by or related to alcohol drugs use. So what are the signs of alcohol in the workplace? Well, in lots of cases in smaller companies where everybody knows each other really well and work together for years, you know when something's wrong or if someone's behaviour changes. It could be nothing, but you just need to be vigilant. If you know the person really well, you could have a quick chat. However, in my experience, there are telltale signs when alcohol or drugs become an issue. Recognising the signs of alcohol problems in the workplace can be crucial for early intervention, and training your managers at all levels to understand alcohol harm is imperative. Some of the telltale signs of alcohol misuse in the workplace can include things like unexplained absences or frequent sick days, as someone regularly arriving late for work and maybe forgetting shift times. Obviously, performance issues take a toll, such as unexplained dips in productivity, decline in work quality and missed deadlines. And then you've obviously got the behavioural changes, such as mood swings and inappropriate behaviour to colleagues. Another telltale sign, obviously, is smelling of alcohol, bloodshot eyes and unsteady gait. But then, worst case scenario, the employee might start taking unexplained risks, affecting safety, increasing near misses and increasing accidents as well. And then there's the lack of concentration on the machine itself, resulting in lack of safety checks and lack of care to themselves and others. So what can you do? Well, one of the first things you can do is conduct a workplace inspection, and you can identify if alcohol is being consumed on the premises, especially on the night shift. If discarded cans, bottles, or even cannabis joints are found within the perimeter of the site, this is usually a good indication. If you suspect this is the case, you can start by checking CCTV footage or check periodically if the empties reappear. The last thing we want is to have to report a colleague, but they cannot operate machinery or vehicles under the influence. If problems continue, it's time to offer support, because sooner or later safety concerns become an issue. This is why you need a drugs and alcohol policy, and you will need the cooperation of employees to implement it. You can start by introducing an employee assistance programme, or even signpost them to the printing charity, a local mental health crisis team. There's always someone there to help and give advice, usually 24 hours a day. So remember, what was once recreational can soon become an addiction. That person will probably need urgent help. The main thing now is the safety concerns. Workplace safety is obviously a critical issue, particularly in industries such as ours, where there are several high-speed and dangerous machines associated with the process, such as guillotines, platens, presses, including warehouse activity and transportation, where operating machinery or driving is required. Can you imagine a driver of a forklift truck under the influence of either drugs or alcohol and the damage and injury they could cause to themselves, others and plant? Some equipment obviously is operated by two or more employees, such as presses or cut and crease machines. An employee under the influence could potentially put the work colleague at risk, for example, forgetting to replace a guard or not following a safe system of work. Obviously, alcohol impairs judgment. A normal experienced employee or operator could take unexplained risks whilst conducting maintenance, which could result in a serious injury. Even low levels of alcohol or drugs can cause significant impairment. So never forget, alcohol and cannabis in decision making affects reaction times and causes sleepiness and dizziness. Obviously, there's never an excuse to drink and drive, but we are fast approaching the Christmas party season. So just be aware the police will be out in force with the drink drive, drug drive campaigns. Many drivers are caught the morning after they've been drinking, as it takes several hours for the alcohol to disappear from the body. Someone who was drinking late the previous evening could easily still be over the limit on the way to work. Even when they get there, they could be driving a forklift truck, for example. So one thing you could do is have your Christmas party on a Friday, so employees don't need to drive the day after. Just one quick stat for you, and that is that there were nearly 9,000 drivers caught drinking or drug driving in the 2023 Christmas campaign last year. So just to finish off, there are legal penalties which are incurred for drink driving. So you could receive a minimum 12-month driving ban, a criminal record, a substantial fine of up to 6 months in prison, or both. Other consequences could include employees losing their jobs and losing their independence, or of course, the ultimate penalty could be having to live with injuring or even killing another person. So just to finish off, just remember that everybody needs help from time to time. Some people handle a crisis better than others, but drugs and alcohol are not the best answer, especially at work. Drink and drugs give people more confidence, which make them take more risks, usually at someone else's expense. I'll just pass you back to Drew. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. Yeah, thanks. That's a really good explanation of some of the health and safety and personal risks and what to look out for. As you say as well, there's also many other impacts on the workplace too. So while not everybody using drugs or alcohol will become dependent, it's worth remembering that even infrequent use can impact on the workplace. So absences, you mentioned, Phil, problems with timekeeping, reduced performance and productivity, having an adverse effect generally on the company reputation or the morale within the company and the workforce. It can also increase the possibility of erratic behaviour, which can be a problem, and some circumstances can lead to increased risks of violence, sexual harassment, or potentially aggressive and abusive language, all of which clearly aren't appropriate. So moving on now to another question I have. What procedures exist for identifying employees who may be under the influence of drugs or alcohol? So do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'll take this one. And as we'll hear throughout the session, a robust policy should be in place with a clear definition of what under the influence means, with the consequences outlined should someone actually be found under the influence of drugs or alcohol. Supervisors and managers should all be trained to recognise those behavioural signs of impairment. Some of these obviously Phil's mentioned, such as slurred speech, unsteady movements, changes in mood and unusual behaviour or performance-related signs. They should also have the guidance on how to document their findings effectively that allow them to monitor and assess the situation. Some workplaces now implement random testing policies. These are for employees in safety-sensitive positions. This can include urine, breath, or saliva tests. And if you feel there is an immediate threat to someone's safety, action should be taken at the first instance, such as removing anyone suspected of being under the influence of drugs or alcohol. If an employee is involved in a workplace accident or safety incident, you may find testing may be conducted to determine if substances were a factor. And after an employee returns from an absence related to substance use, assessments may be conducted to determine their fitness for duty. But please bear in mind that there are medical conditions that require prescription medication that can have the same effects. When this is the case, reasonable adjustments should be made when required.
Right, thanks, Josh. That's really useful. Another question we received is actually a really common one. What should a manager do if they suspect that an employee has an alcohol or drug dependency? Probably one that falls to the HR team. So
Yeah, I can take that one, Jude, if that's all right.
Thanks, Jude.
Well, I guess the first thing to note is that actually most managers are not likely to be an expert in this sort of thing. So the best thing to do would be to consider making a referral to OC Health for an initial review of the employee's state of health. Of course, approaching the issue with the employee in the first instance could be a challenge, so it needs to be managed sensitively, and the manager will need to express his genuine concerns for the employee's well-being and safety at work. And then depending on the advice that comes back from OC Health, it might then be appropriate to offer the employee some time off to undergo appropriate medical treatment or counselling, and offering that time off as paid would be really good if you could. The overall approach should of course be one of support wherever possible. If the employer provides employee assistance programs, then they should highlight that to the employees. And if at any point the manager suspects that the employee is unfit or unsafe to be at work because of the influence of alcohol, excuse me, then it may be necessary to consider temporarily suspending them to begin an investigation and pending possible disciplinary action.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jo. Some really good points there. So what should be done if drugs potentially or alcohol bottles and things that you mentioned, Phil, are found to be at work?
So employee safety is top priority in the workplace. So if drugs are suspected or found and the employee appears impaired, the employer should assess the situation and ensure there's no immediate risk of harm. Any drugs should be secured in accordance to your workplace procedures. Under UK health and safety law, employers must ensure employees are not under the influence of drugs or alcohol in any way that impairs their ability to work safely. That's actually in line with the Health and Safety at Work Act and the Management of Health and Safety at Work regulations. As it's been mentioned, clear drugs and alcohol policy should be in place outlining acceptable behaviour and along with the consequences for any breaches. A lot of organisations have zero tolerance approach to drugs and alcohol. So employers should conduct a risk assessment to identify potential hazards related to drug or alcohol use within the workplace, particularly in safety critical environments such as manufacturing, where impaired performance could lead to severe consequences. The legal framework for drugs includes the Misuse of Drugs Act, which classifies substances into 3 categories, classes A, B, and C. It sets out penalties for prosecution, distribution, and the production of illegal drugs. If drugs are found and they're classified as illegal substances, the employer may be required to report the matter to law enforcement, and failure to do so could expose the employer to legal liability. I hope this answers that question.
Thanks, Mila. Yes, I think it does. Clearly, potentially a really serious issue if that is the case. So the next question I have that's come in is one that comes up a lot in HR, and it is alcohol addiction covered by the disability provisions of the Equality Act? So, for example, is the addiction actually a disability? So anybody want to cover that from HR?
I'll pick this one up, Jude. So according to the Equality Act 2010, the regulations specify that addiction to alcohol, nicotine, or any other substance, except when the addiction results from a medically prescribed drug, is considered an impairment for the purpose of the Act. So therefore, alcohol addiction itself is not covered by the Act. However, an employee may have a physical or mental impairment that qualifies as a disability under the Act, even if it was caused by or resulted from alcohol addiction. So, for instance, a serious liver condition or depressive illnesses could be considered as a disability, so regardless of its origin in the alcohol addiction. So the cause of the disability is irrelevant, and alcohol addiction might be a symptom or side effect of another medical condition that itself qualifies as a disability. So therefore, if an employee is or appears to be suffering from alcohol addiction, the employer should conduct further medical inquiries to determine if there's an underlying medical condition which is either caused by or triggered by alcohol addiction. This qualifies as a disability.
Thanks. Okay, Yolanda, that's really interesting. So next, where an employer suspects that an employee is actually working under the influence of alcohol, what action can and should it take? Who would like to take that one? Maybe somebody else from the HR team?
Hi Jude, I'll pick that one up.
Thanks, Ian.
It's okay. As an employer, you should take care not to make unsubstantiated assumptions about an employee whom it suspects is under the influence of alcohol, and should keep in mind that there may be other medical reasons for that behaviour. However, it is also very important for you to take precautions to prevent any potential danger to the health and safety of the employee and other colleagues. If you have access to an occupational health service provider, has been mentioned before, you could refer them straight away. The employee could be asked to agree to be tested for alcohol if such a test is available. However, in many cases, this is not possible, and the manager who finds themselves in this situation should seek the opinion of HR manager or another appropriate person to support their suspicions. It is important to make a note of any observations made at the time. The most appropriate course of action in these circumstances may be to suspend the employee, as mentioned, and that would be done immediately whilst you investigate further. Irrespective of any disciplinary action that may follow, the individual is likely to be a safety risk to either themselves or others. Suspension will be with full pay unless the contract of employment explicitly specifies that suspension in these circumstances may be unpaid. When taking the decision to suspend, you should consider whether any of these additional steps need to be taken to support the individual. If under the influence of drugs or alcohol, they should not drive, so organise a taxi to take them home. If an individual refuses this, you should not put yourself at risk in an attempt to prevent the employee from driving, as this could escalate the situation and the risk. Ultimately, it may be necessary to contact the police, as they could be a danger to themselves but other road users as well. You could consider making the person's emergency contacts aware also. Following an investigation, which would typically take 1 or 2 days, the employer should invite the employee to attend an investigatory interview to establish their version of events. Depending upon the outcome of the investigation, disciplinary action may follow. The employer should follow any provisions of its disciplinary procedure that relate specifically to working under the influence of alcohol. If it is established through the investigation that the employee has an alcohol addiction, the employer may, depending on its policies and procedures, offer a programme of support.
Okay, thanks, Ian. Thanks for that. The next question we have to follow on from that is actually slightly similar insofar as it's how should employers deal with employees who turn up for work drunk or hungover, maybe after watching the World Cup game or some other major sporting event? Would the response be different in those sorts of circumstances?
Okay, so this is an interesting question, Jude, and something you could potentially prepare for. If you know there is a major event happening, you could make some changes for the days in question, such as later start times or earlier finishes. You could create a policy for a one-off event and even consider showing the game in a suitable breakout area during working hours. However, as I have mentioned in previously, if an employee shows up to work under the influence of alcohol, regardless of the circumstances, or unfit to work to being hungover, the employer should deal with the matter in line with its policy on drug and alcohol use and its disciplinary procedure. And again, as mentioned, suspend the employee. If you plan, you could make it clear to employees what the consequences of this would be. You may be tempted to overlook an employee's attendance at work under the influence of alcohol, particularly if the employees are usually a good performer. However, you should always deal with the employee's drunkenness to enforce the message that such conduct will not be tolerated. Failure to act could result in other employees attending work drunk in the belief that the employer will impose no sanctions. Remember that suspension is just a precautionary measure.
So, how does this differ if you suspect the employee is misusing drugs or alcohol, but outside of work, or is it the same?
Okay, due to the type of work an individual performs, you may have a zero tolerance on drugs and alcohol. And if you or your colleagues suspect an individual is misusing drugs or alcohol outside of work, even if there is no suggestion that the employee is doing so in the workplace, while it can be difficult to challenge an individual, you must do this, and if the person is prepared to discuss the situation with you, proceed as if they had disclosed the issue to you. If they deny there is an issue, or they are not prepared to discuss it with you, you may need to keep an eye on their behaviour over a period to see if there are any problematic behaviours. Always make a short note in their personal file to record the fact that you've raised the issue and recording the responses. You may also have a policy on random drug testing or alcohol testing, and as such, you will follow your normal process. So some things to bear in mind when addressing this with an employee. Drinking or drug taking may be caused by a number of things, for example, a mental health issue. So do not assume these behaviours are related to substance misuse or substance use. Be clear that although the manager will aim to ensure the conversation will be confidential, some degree of information sharing may be likely unnecessary. Use open, non-judgmental questions to start a conversation. For example, you've looked very tired over the last few days. How are you feeling? May elicit more of a response than is everything all right, to which a person may just say yes. Stress the intention is to try and support them. Focus on facts and specific examples of concerning behaviour. The individual must not feel under pressure or judged. Use the terms problem or alcohol rather than alcoholic or alcoholism, or phrases like frequent and excessive alcohol use, or frequent drug use, or misuse of drugs rather than addiction or addict. If you want to stop and search or test an employee due to concerns, you should have a policy in place as mentioned, as you need to gain consent to carry out any testing on an employee, and there are issues you will need to consider such as GDPR. If you do not have a policy or process in place and believe you may require one, please contact your HR business partner or the help desk and we would be happy to help. Finally, it's often the case that a person with a real or perceived problem may become the source of gossip or rumour. Sometimes this may be the first way you become aware of an issue. It is important to ensure that you respond to any concerns, whilst at the same time ensure that the individual situation is kept confidential and that gossip, which can become exaggerated or ill-founded, is not allowed to persist. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ian. Hopefully, Mila, that answered your question, and some interesting points there. And as you say, in the introducing testing or random testing or anything, there's a lot to consider if that's something the company wants to proceed with. Okay, so next, what should I do if an employee discloses that they have or think they may have a problem with either drugs or alcohol? How can I best support them? Do you want to pick that one up, Yolandi?
Yeah, I will do. Thank you, Jude. So if an employee approaches you or their manager about a problem with drugs or alcohol, it's important to respond supportively. So first, thank them for their disclosure and assure them that the company will help them to get the support they need. Then the company should treat the matter confidentially without any judgment. You could also offer support through occupational health services and your employee assistance program if available. If not, then direct them to local community substance misuse providers or charities like AA, NA, Drinkaware, or Frank, or advise them to seek guidance from their GP. There is also the printing charity, which is a free service available to all those who work in the printing industry, and employees would just need to register for this service. If the employee has already contacted their specialist agency, determine how the company can accommodate their needs. So this could be allowing time off for substance misuse counselling, treatment agencies, self-help groups, telephone helplines or apps. So consider any health and safety implications and think about any aspects of the role that could put them or others at risk. If adjustments to the role are necessary, or if they need to be stopped from working, treat this as you would do with any other health issue. If the individual is signed off by a doctor or substance misuse professional, follow your normal sickness absence procedures. You need to remind the employee of your drug and alcohol policy, noting that attending work under the influence could lead to disciplinary action, and document any conversations. You need to ensure that only those who need to know about the employee situation are informed, and review your company's working practices and culture, just to ensure that the issue isn't stemming from stress. So if an employee has been absent for rehabilitation or has a flexible arrangement to receive support from a drug charity or medical professional, but is now in recovery and able to work, plan for their return. So this might involve a phased return to work, a mini induction to catch up on missed business changes, and support from line managers during the first few weeks. You may also need to offer flexibility in their working pattern, such as allowing attendance at mutual aid fellowship meetings like AA during the first 90 days. Work with managers to address any work-related factors that could have contributed to the problem, such as workload.
Just a quick question, Yolandi. Would this advice be any different in a situation where an employee's family or friends disclose that they have an issue with drugs or alcohol?
Okay, thank you, Josh. You should consider the source of the information. So family and friends may have genuine concerns, but there could also be an ulterior motive, especially if the information comes from a disgruntled ex-partner or somebody with an alternative agenda. You should then reflect on whether you or the line manager have noticed any concerning behaviour or performance issues with the employee. If there are existing concerns, this information might warrant further attention. You should make sure to keep the information confidential and limit discussions to those who need to know. So that would be HR or the employee's direct manager. If there are existing concerns, consider having a private and supportive conversation with the employee and express your observations without mentioning the external disclosure, and focus on offering support rather than making accusations. You should then inform the employee about available support resources such as occupational health, employee assistance program, local substance misuse providers, charities like the AA, NA, Drinkaware or Frank, or the printing charity as explained before. You could then suggest that the family member or friend contact the specialist charities or organisations that can offer support to the employee. Internally, you could use this opportunity to review the working practices and cultures in your company to ensure that the issue isn't stemming from workplace stress or other job-related factors. I would again recommend that you document any actions taken and follow up with the employee as needed to ensure they're receiving the support that they need.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for answering those questions, Yolandi. So the next question is related to something I referred to earlier and the potential impacts that even infrequent use can have on the workplace. So where we said the possibility of erratic behaviour in the workplace from an employee, and that can lead to increased risk of things like violence or sexual harassment. And that's particularly important now, given the introduction of the new legal requirement for companies to implement measures to prevent instances of sexual harassment that came into force last month. So the question we've received is, what can or should employers do to avoid problems arising from work-related social events?
Shall I grab that one, Jude?
Yeah.
Obviously, I know that HR can often be seen as the fun police, but it's really important that we ensure staff can have fun and still stay safe at these types of events. So it's advisable that the company appoints somebody to have overall responsibility for supervising any social events, and that person is capable of dealing with any drunk or disorderly employees. And it's also important that that person takes responsibility for the event really seriously. And I know it's unlikely to be popular, but they should probably remain sober. It's great that employers might want to provide a couple of free drinks for employees, but they need to be mindful that an unlimited bar is just going to encourage drinking alcohol to an excess. It would be more sensible to limit the supply of alcohol and make sure that there's plenty of alcohol-free or low alcohol alternatives. Employers have a duty of care to employees, and they've got to consider how they might get home after work social events. They should probably encourage staff to think in advance about how they're going to get home safely without drinking and driving. And employers could consider hiring coaches or minibuses, or maybe just provide telephone numbers for the local taxi firm.
Joe, should an employee have written rules on work-related social events?
Ideally, yes, Josh. Employers should provide clear written guidance in advance of any event, which obviously you've got to think about before it happens. That guidance should be clear and explain what acceptable standards of behaviour there should be, as well as the disciplinary sanctions that could result from any misconduct. It might be a stretch too far to expect employees to stay completely sober at these types of events, but I'd advise that clear instructions are given about moderate intake of alcohol, and that fighting, inappropriate language and illegal drug use are absolutely prohibited. In addition, you should include reference to the company's zero tolerance to sexual harassment, as Judith said, regardless of whether alcohol is involved or not, as it's the company's responsibility to prevent sexual harassment against both men and women at work and work events.
Yeah, indeed. Hopefully that's answering your questions, Josh. So thanks for answering all those, Joe, and the rest of the team for the questions that we've posed so far. Some really good tips. I think they'll come out of there. Just following on from the CIBD survey I mentioned at the beginning, following that survey, they did go on then to produce some tips and some recommendations that HR or the management in the company could look to introduce that hopefully would help support all of those programs we've mentioned. So clearly a policy has featured quite a lot. So policy implementation that's very clear and prioritises the wellbeing of employees alongside disciplinary measures. I think one of my colleagues said earlier about, you know, how important it is to highlight the consequences of breaching those policies. It should set out the expectation of what isn't acceptable and detail where employees can go if perhaps they feel there is a problem, and signpost to help. Definitely training for managers. So it's only fair to ensure that line managers receive the training so they feel capable and confident to handle any disclosures that may come their way, and be able to guide and support their team members with anything that's available. Promote awareness, so creating an environment where employees know about the support that is available and feels comfortable seeking that without any stigma or fear of recrimination against them. Prevent misuse, so obviously incorporate substance misuse considerations into any wellbeing initiatives or programs that you may have. As well as regularly assessing, that's been mentioned, assessing those stress levels and working conditions. I think you touched on, Yolandi, to make sure that there aren't other influencing factors. And clearly supporting rehabilitation. So offering time off and things like that to support people helps you retain valuable employees post-rehabilitation. Importantly, companies should try and avoid fueling a drinking culture. Consider the implications, obviously, for wellbeing and inclusion when planning any work-related events. And again, topical now, that's been mentioned with Christmas looming. So plans should strike the appropriate balance between that rewarding of employees and having the culture where people, you know, feel that it's nice to get together and have a social event, as well as obviously a genuine commitment to their well-being and considering, as we say, Christmas approaching. So we're just coming up to, well, just gone 22. So I don't know if anybody has any more questions. Have we got anything that's come in during the session, Mika?
Jude, oh,
Yes, we've had one question come in. So it's from an anonymous attendee. We are looking to implement a drugs and alcohol policies, so have nothing in place to refer to at the moment. Would it be acceptable in the policy to allow us to test on site if we have our suspicions, although we have no occupational health on site?
Shall I take that one or start? And colleagues may want to jump in. Ian touched on this, and clearly, yes, there should be a policy in place if it's the intention of the business to want to do that. There may be different ways you can do it. It might be just if you suspect somebody, it may be random drug testing. You need to give quite a lot of consideration to a number of aspects, both health and safety and HR. From a HR point of view, consent obviously needs to be given. Ideally, your policy is going to be very clear about the consequences if you achieve and I say a positive result. You also need to calibrate what you consider to be acceptable levels and positive results. So is it a no tolerance, or is there a level that is acceptable? Is it going to be different for different job roles? Is it going to be, obviously, other considerations? GDPR, it's considered to be sensitive data under the Data Protection Act. So there's specific information about how it's actually looked after, processed and kept. And all of this would need to be included in any privacy notices or data protection policies about what you do with that and at what point it gets destroyed and how it's destroyed. So there's lots of different aspects, and it's quite an involved process if you're going to introduce that as a policy. We have information on it, and perhaps if the details, if whoever it is does want to make contact either with your regional advisor, we can give you a bit more information on it and provide you with some example policies and things. The other thing is, ideally you should have a contractual clause, because at the point that you then request consent, if it's refused, because obviously they don't have to agree, if it's refused, then potentially they are obviously breaching their contract as well. So, you know, you get them to agree to it in the contract, but you still need consent at the point of obviously taking the test. I don't know if anybody else has any examples or previous experiences they'd like to share on how alcohol or drug testing is being carried out.
I think that covers it, Jude.
Yeah. Okay, good. Is that all for now, Mika?
Yeah, that's all we have for the questions. So if anyone has any further questions, don't hesitate to, as Jude said, email your advisor, and that's health and safety and HR side of things, depends what the question is. And thanks for joining us on this webinar. Our next webinar is on holidays, join the conversation holidays, and how to manage holidays effectively within the workplace. And that is on the 4th of December, so do join us on that webinar. What we will do, we will share the recording of this webinar so you have it to look back on and you can gather more insight from what you've listened to so far. And we'll send and share all the supportive documents that cover some of the points that we discussed in this webinar. So thank you everyone for joining us to hear our insights on drugs and alcohol management within the workplace. And thank you to all our experts on the call from the BPF professional service team, HR and health and safety. And I hope everyone has a great end of morning and afternoon and evening. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mika. Can I just
Cheers,
finally...
everyone.
Oh, I was going to just highlight again to just another reminder. I know we've mentioned it a couple of times, but if anybody isn't familiar with the Printing Charity and the great work that they do, just get in touch and we can give you their details, because they do have an employee assistance programme that's available for people to access, which is a really, really good resource. So just let us know. And
thanks, Jude, and to everyone attending, we'll share that in the details that we share post-webinar. Thank you very much, everyone.
Okay,
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
bye.